Welcome back to NBCLX. I'm Tabitha Lipkin in our virtual set. Now, while we are waiting on the results of the presidential and some Senate races, we do know one winner. That's weed. Tuesday, residents in Arizona, Montana, and New Jersey approved ballot measures to legalize recreational marijuana. And in South Dakota, they became the first state to legalize both recreational and medicinal use at the same time. Mississippi approved a strictly medicinal measure, and legalizing weed has made states quite a bit of money. Let's talk about that for a second. CNBC reported in 2019 that the state of Colorado actually generated more than $1 billion in revenue from legal marijuana since they legalized it in 2014. The state of Illinois, their Department of Revenue, they reported $100 million in tax revenue this August after legalizing recreational weed in January of this year. And last year, Forbes, they actually reported that the cannabis industry employed nearly 300,000 people, increased by 44% from 2018 to 2019. So it makes a lot of sense on why states would want a little piece of that action. Let's talk more about that green for a second, and let's bring in Jeremy Burke, the senior reporter who has been working on this and specifically focuses on the cannabis industry at Business Insider. Jeremy, Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota are all getting in on the recreational weed action, which is interesting considering that South Dakota and Montana are kind of more conservative states. Yep. Do you think that this is actually signaling a shift in the change in ideology?
I do think that. I mean, I think in a really contentious election, the one thing we've seen is that cannabis is really, really popular no matter which side of the aisle you're on. Your point about South Dakota is totally well taken. I mean, they basically leapfrogged doing medical and recreational at the same time. To be clear, it took California 20 years from when they legalized medical marijuana to actually vote on recreational marijuana. So I think we're seeing a huge paradigm shift here. Marijuana is very, very popular among Americans. Go figure.
And specifically, is it more popular amongst certain types of Americans, younger Americans, or is it kind of starting to bleed out across the board?
It's starting to bleed out across the board. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Obviously, polling, we didn't really expect to see South Dakota nor Montana actually legalize, and they did. To be clear, the South Dakota vote was close. I mean, it passed with about 52% support. Montana as well was close, but New Jersey on the East Coast actually passed with nearly 70% support. So yes, it's probably more popular among younger voters. It's probably slightly more popular among Democrats, but Republicans themselves, older voters themselves, they really do support cannabis legalization.
What about Mississippi?
Mississippi is an interesting case, right? Mississippi had two separate ballot measures to pass medical marijuana, and one of them was very restrictive. It was proposed by the state legislature itself. It basically said that marijuana could only be used for those who are terminally ill and had to be pharmaceutical grade, of which there's very few marijuana products that are actually pharmaceutical grade. And Mississippi voters rejected that really narrow bill for a much deeper and broad-ranging one. So it just goes to show that Mississippi voters did want medical marijuana. They were supportive of it, and they rejected the much more restrictive measure. In Mississippi, you know, it's about as red of a state as you can get.
Now, do you think that legal marijuana is actually going to help make up for some budget deficits during the economic downturn?
It is a very good question. I would say the jury is still out on that. I've spoken about this before. It takes a very long time to go from voting on legalizing marijuana to actually having stores open, having consumers buy it, getting the tax revenue, and creating the jobs. For example, Maine legalized marijuana in 2016. Stores really only opened earlier this year, and when I say stores open, that's like 3 or 4 across the state. So if you're working on a budget shortfall in your 2022 budget, I don't know if marijuana is the quick fix. That being said, you know, it is a fix. It will end up generating tax revenue once you get the regulations put in place, once you get the enforcement put in place, and once you figure out the licensing. So it's a long road. The short answer is it's not a quick fix. The long answer is it absolutely will add to a state budget over the long term.
Marijuana legalization is an incredibly complex thing to talk about, but I am curious, do you think that the new states that are legalizing it will have something that they can take away from the states that have passed similar measures in the past? You know, what is the good and what is the bad you think that these new states may be dealing with?
I think they do. I think that a lot of states want to avoid what has been happening in California. I mean, one of the stated goals of marijuana legalization is to move consumers into a legal, regulated market from an illicit market. And part and parcel of that is ensuring that it's cost effective, right? If you are a daily or weekly marijuana consumer and you can get your weed cheaper from an illegal dealer, you will do that, and that plays into how it's taxed. So New Jersey, I think, did a good job at setting their taxes low. I mean, it's taxed around 6%. Other states have levied, a 20% tax. So it remains to be seen whether that 20% tax will actually, bring consumers into the regulated market. The second piece of that, which Illinois has done a really good job, is opening up the industry to what is known, I guess, in industry parlance as equity applicants. These are people who are minorities who may have been convicted of drug crimes. So Illinois has created an interesting system to preferentially give those people licenses to actually partake in the economic benefit of marijuana legalization. So I think we'll see a lot of states sort of adopt that model. I think there will be a lot of nitty-gritty details to work out there. And all politics is local, right? Each jurisdiction will have its own considerations to make, but there is enough of a framework for them to lean on there.
Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here at NBCLX.
Yeah, thank you.
And while talking about this, we also have to talk about the social justice element of taking part in these laws and reforming these laws. Part of the push to fast track New Jersey's legislation is to stop arrests and prosecution. Now, the ACLU reports that the law enforcement has made more than 6 million cannabis-related arrests over the past 8 years. That's more arrests than all violent crimes combined. Those ACLU numbers show that on average, a black person is nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested. New Jersey has one of the highest arrest rates for cannabis alongside Texas and New York. And in 2017, New Jersey arrested nearly 38,000 marijuana-related arrests, nearly 95 a day. And a disproportionate amount of minorities made up those arrests. And now advocates are asking the state AG to simply stop prosecuting people for possession and arresting them for that. Jo Beth?
Thanks, Tabitha. Some states are looking at taking decriminalization one step further. In Oregon, for instance, voters approved a controversial ballot measure. Measure 110 decriminalizes small amounts of drugs like cocaine, heroin, oxycodone, and methamphetamines. They also decriminalized psychedelic mushrooms, and the measure applies marijuana sales tax towards paying for drug addiction treatment. Now, it passed with almost 60% support, going further than any other state to ease restrictions on drugs by decriminalizing drugs often associated with severe addiction. An Oregon study showed Black and Indigenous people were more likely to be convicted of drug crimes than white people, creating a record that follows them for the rest of their lives. Now, advocates say the measure prevents recovering users from being stigmatized by criminal charges, allowing them to pull themselves out of a cycle of drug-related crime. And they also say that this will reduce overdose deaths and provide a better pathway to recovery. Over in D.C., a ballot initiative would loosen restrictions on psychedelic plants. The votes aren't final yet, but so far 76% of voters are in favor of the measure. Initiative 81 is what they call it, and it would make certain psychedelic plants and fungi part of the D.C. Metro Police's lowest law enforcement priorities. The D.C. Board of Elections allowed the initiative on the ballot after advocates collected 25,000 signatures. And one of those advocates says that she uses mushrooms to help her heal from postpartum depression. The measure in D.C. will go to the D.C. Council for review, and if it doesn't get overturned, it will be sent to Congress for review. Denver, Oakland, Santa Cruz, and Ann Arbor all have some form of decriminalized psychedelics, and over the past few years, there has been a growing conversation around the medical value of psychedelic drugs for treating trauma and depression.